During the inheritance meeting, my daughter threw the papers in my face and screamed, "You're a leech! You probably killed Dad for the money!" I simply stood up and walked away. On Monday, the police knocked on her door. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. In the partitioning of the inheritance, my daughter threw the documents in my face and screamed, "You're a leech! You must have killed Daddy for money." I simply stood up and walked away. On Monday, the police knocked on her door. That moment replays in my mind like a broken record. The conference room of Stevens & Grant law firm had fallen completely silent after Nola's outburst. I can still see the horrified expressions on everyone's faces. Mr. Stevens with his mouth slightly agape, his assistant frozen mid-note-taking, and Richard, my late husband's brother, staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. I didn't cry. I didn't yell back. 61 years of living had taught me that sometimes silence is the only dignity we have left. So I gathered my purse, straightened my blouse, and walked out with my head held high, even as my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. That was 3 days ago. 3 days of unanswered calls, of neighbors suddenly becoming busy when they saw me approaching, of sitting alone in the house that had felt empty for years, even when Gerald was still alive. The knock on my door came at precisely 8:15 a.m. 2 officers, 1 male and 1 female, their expressions somber and professional. "Mrs. Agatha Wilson?" the female officer asked. I nodded, tightening the belt of my robe. "That's me. We need to ask you some questions about the allegations made by your daughter, Nola Wilson." I stepped aside to let them in, oddly calm. "Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." The officers exchanged glances, clearly thrown by my composure. They probably expected tears, protests, maybe even resistance. Instead, they got offered breakfast blend. I led them to the living room, the same room where Gerald and I had sat together for 38 years, yet never really talked. The same room where I'd bandaged Nola's scraped knees and read her bedtime stories. The same room where I'd swallowed my pain, night after night, year after year. "Mrs. Wilson," the male officer began after declining my coffee offer, "your daughter has filed a formal complaint suggesting that you may have been involved in your husband's death. She claims you stood to gain financially and had expressed—" He checked his notes. "Resentment and hostility toward Mr. Wilson in the months before his passing." A sad smile crossed my face. "Did she tell you that her father had pancreatic cancer?" "Stage 4. The doctors gave him 3 months. He lasted 5. The female officer's expression softened slightly. "Yes, we have the medical reports. But Ms. Wilson claims there were irregularities with his medication." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I reached for a photo album on the coffee table and opened it to a picture of Nola's 5th birthday. There she was, beaming at the camera, missing her 2 front teeth, Gerald and I standing behind her. The perfect family portrait. "Daughter," I said finally, my voice steady, "has always seen what she wanted to see. When she was little, she saw her father as a hero. When she was a teenager, she saw him as her protector. And now, as an adult, she can't bear to see him as merely human. Flawed, complicated, sometimes cruel." The officers waited, sensing there was more. "I didn't kill my husband, officers. I took care of him until his last breath. I changed his sheets when he couldn't control his bodily functions. I crushed his pills into applesauce when he couldn't swallow them whole. I read to him from his favorite books when his eyes became too weak to see the words. I closed the photo album. And I did all this while he cursed at me, while he told me I was doing everything wrong, while he called our daughter to complain about me. Just as he had done for most of our marriage. The female officer's pen hovered over her notepad. "Mrs. Wilson, are you saying your husband was abusive?" The word hung in the air between us. Abusive. After decades of carefully avoiding that term of making excuses and keeping secrets, it felt strange to hear it spoken aloud. I'm saying that my daughter never knew her father. Not really. I made sure of that. The officers stayed for nearly 2 hours, asking detailed questions about Gerald's final days, about our marriage, about my relationship with Nola. I answered everything truthfully, perhaps for the first time in my life. As they were leaving, the female officer paused at the door. "We'll need to speak with your daughter again. Is there anything else you think we should know?" I thought about Nola, about her rage and pain, about the little girl who once looked at me with complete trust. "Just tell her." My voice finally cracked, just slightly. "Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't give her the father she deserved." After they left, I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by memories and ghosts. The grandfather clock in the hallway, Gerald's pride and joy, ticked loudly in the silence. In 24 hours, the truth I had buried for decades would finally come to light, and my daughter would have to face the father she never really knew. I never wanted Nola to know. That was the promise I made to myself the day she was born, her tiny hand wrapped around my finger, her eyes still closed to the world. I swore she would never see the darkness I lived with. She would have the father I never had. Loving, supportive, kind. What a beautiful lie I crafted for her. The day after the police visit, I found myself in the attic, surrounded by cardboard. Boxes labeled in my neat handwriting. Christmas decorations, Nola's school projects, tax records, 1985-1990. But I was looking for a specific box, one without a label, pushed far into the corner beneath the eaves where Gerald would never bother looking. My hands trembled as I pulled it out, dust coating my fingers. Inside were the things I couldn't bear to look at, but couldn't bring myself to destroy. Hospital discharge papers with injury descriptions that didn't match the stories we told. A small notebook where I'd documented dates and incidents in code only I understood. Photos of bruises I'd carefully hidden under long sleeves and high collars. And beneath it all, a sealed envelope addressed to Nola, written on a night 15. Years ago, when Gerald's rage had been particularly vicious. I'd written it thinking I might not survive until morning, wanting my daughter to know the truth if the worst happened. But morning came, as it always did. I hid the letter away and continued the charade. The doorbell rang, startling me from my memories. Through the peephole, I saw Detective Lisa Morales, the female officer from yesterday, standing alone on my porch. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said when I opened the door. I had a few follow-up questions and was in the neighborhood. Her casual tone didn't fool me. Detectives don't just happen to be in the neighborhood. I invited her in anyway, offering tea this time instead of coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the windows, making the space seem deceptively cheerful. "Mrs. Wilson," she began, her dark eyes studying me carefully. "When we spoke yesterday, you mentioned protecting your daughter from knowing her father. Could you elaborate on that?" I stirred my tea slowly, buying time. "Detective, have you ever loved someone so much that you'd bear any pain to keep them safe?" She didn't answer immediately, which told me she understood exactly what I meant. My husband was complicated, I continued. In public, he was charming, respected, a pillar of the community. At home, he was a different man entirely. "Abusive," she supplied, not as a question this time. I nodded, the admission still difficult. After all these years, yes, but never to Nola. I made sure of that. How? I became very good at predicting his moods, at knowing what would set him off. I learned to position myself between them, to absorb his anger before it could touch her. Detective Morales's expression remained professional, but I saw the slight tightening around her eyes. She'd seen cases like mine before. "Why didn't you leave him?" It was the question everyone asks, the one that sounds so simple to those who've never lived it. I tried. Once. I took a sip of tea, the memory bitter on my tongue. Nola was 7. I packed our bags while Gerald was at work, withdrew what little money I could from our account, and took a bus to my sister's house in Oregon. What happened? 3 days later, he showed up with the police. Claimed I'd kidnapped his daughter, that I was mentally unstable. He had character witnesses, our pastor, his colleagues, neighbors, all testifying to what a devoted husband and father he was, how concerned they were about my state of mind. I set my cup down, noting how steady my hand had become. The police believed him. Of course they did. And my sister. She had young children of her own. She couldn't risk getting involved in what Gerald promised would be a vicious legal battle. So, you went back? Yes. And Gerald made sure I understood there wouldn't be a second chance. He threatened to take Nola away permanently if I ever tried to leave again. I met her eyes directly. I believed him. He had the money, the connections, the respect of everyone who mattered. I had nothing. Detective Morales nodded slowly. And you never told Nola any of this? How could I? She adored him. He made sure of that, lavishing her with gifts, attention, making me the disciplinarian while he got to be the fun parent. By the time she was a teenager, she thought I was just bitter, controlling, the bad guy in their story. The detective made a few notes, then looked up. Mrs. Wilson, did your daughter ever witness any incidents between you and your husband? She saw the aftermath sometimes. Me with a split lip saying I'd walked into a door. A broken wrist I claimed happened when I slipped on the stairs. But Gerald was careful. His worst moments were saved for when Nola wasn't home. And now she thinks you killed him. I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. Ironic, isn't it? I spent decades keeping him alive, managing his medication, driving him to appointments, researching treatments, even when part of me wished for the freedom his death would bring. Detective Morales was quiet for a moment. Then, we found something interesting when we spoke to your daughter yesterday. She pulled out her phone, swiped through a few screens, and placed it on the table between us. Do you recognize this? On the screen was a photograph of a handwritten note in Gerald's distinctive scrawl. If anything happens to me, look closer at Agatha. She's not who you think she is. My heart sank. When did he write this? About a month before he died, according to Nola. She found it tucked into his Bible. Of course. Gerald's final manipulation, his parting gift. He couldn't stand the thought of me living without his control, even after he was gone. Detective, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. My husband knew he was dying. He couldn't bear the thought of not being able to control the narrative anymore. This was his way of ensuring I would never find peace, even after he was gone. She studied me for a long moment. We're also looking into some financial discrepancies in your husband's estate. Large withdrawals in the months before his death. Accounts we can't trace. This was news to me. I don't know anything about that. Gerald handled all our finances. Ms. Wilson seems to think you were hiding money, preparing for his death. The irony almost made me laugh again. Detective, I haven't had access to our bank accounts in 20 years. Gerald gave me a household allowance closely monitored. I had to keep receipts for everything I purchased. I could see her processing this, fitting it into the picture that was emerging. There's one more thing, she said, her tone shifting slightly. Your daughter will be coming in for another interview tomorrow morning. Given what you've told me, I think it might be time for some truths to come to light. The fear that gripped me was immediate and visceral. No, please. She can't know. Mrs. Wilson, Detective Morales interrupted gently. Your daughter has accused you of murder. The truth is your best defense now. As she left, I returned to the attic, to the box of secrets I'd kept for decades. The envelope addressed to Nola felt heavy in my hands. Sometimes, protecting those we love means letting them face painful truths. I just never thought it would be like this. I spent the night sitting in Gerald's old leather armchair, the envelope addressed to Nola resting in my lap. I'd reread it so many times that the paper had grown soft at the creases. Every word was etched into my memory, a history of pain I'd carefully hidden from the world. Sleep refused to come. Instead, my mind replayed moments from our marriage like a grim slideshow. Gerald smashing plates because dinner was 5 minutes late. Gerald's fingers digging into my arm, leaving marks that would bloom into bruises by morning. Gerald's calculated apologies, always followed by periods of eerie calm before the next storm. The sunrise found me still awake, watching as golden light crept across the living room floor. The same floor where I'd once lain motionless after Gerald pushed me down the stairs, my ribs cracked, afraid to call for help because Nola was having a sleepover with friends. The doorbell rang at precisely 9 a.m. I knew it would be Detective Morales before I opened the door. "You look like you haven't slept," she observed, concern briefly flickering across her professional facade. "I've been preparing," I replied, gesturing to the box I'd brought down from the attic, now sitting on the coffee table. Detective Morales nodded, understanding immediately. "Is that what I think it is?" "Evidence," I confirmed. 38 years of it." She sat across from me, notepad ready. "Mrs. Wilson, before we go through this, there's something you should know. We've made some discoveries about your husband's financial activities." My heart quickened. "What kind of discoveries?" "Your husband had a second bank account. One you weren't aware of." She paused, watching my reaction carefully. "There were regular transfers to this account for years. Money siphoned from your joint savings. The total amount is substantial." I wasn't surprised. Gerald had always been secretive about money, doling out household funds like precious gems, demanding explanations for every penny spent. "There's more," Detective Morales continued. 2 weeks before his death, he changed his will. The new version contained language suggesting you might have been mistreating him during his illness. "He was laying groundwork, Mrs. Wilson." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Of course he was. Gerald always planned 10 steps ahead. There's one more thing." She hesitated. "We found evidence that he had been in contact with an old college friend of yours, a James Harrington." The name hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't heard it in decades, hadn't allowed myself to even think it. "James?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears. That's not possible. I haven't spoken to him since before Nola was born." Detective Morales watched me carefully. "Your husband reached out to him about 3 months before his death. We've obtained their email correspondence." Mr. Wilson seemed interested in Mr. Harrington's recollections of you from your college days. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Gerald had been building a case against me, reaching back decades to construct a narrative. And James, dear, sweet James who'd wanted to marry me before Gerald came along, what had he told my husband? "I need to see those emails," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Detective Morales pulled a folder from her bag and handed it to me. "Take your time." The exchanges were brief, clinical. Gerald introducing himself as my husband, expressing concerns about my mental state as his illness progressed. James's polite but reserved responses, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. And then the last email from Gerald, sent just weeks before his death. "I appreciate your discretion, Mr. Harrington. I understand your reluctance to discuss your relationship with Agatha, but as her husband, I have a right to know about her past behaviors. Her outbursts have become concerning as my health declines." James's response was short. "Mr. Wilson, I knew Agatha as a kind, gentle person who never displayed the behaviors you're describing. If she's changed so dramatically, perhaps the question isn't what's wrong with her, but what's happened to her." Over the years, I wish you both well, but I won't be responding to further inquiries. Tears blurred my vision. After all these years, James had defended me, had seen through Gerald's manipulations in a way few ever had. He contacted others too, Detective Morales said gently. Old friends, former colleagues, most responded similarly to Mr. Harrington. I set the folder down, a strange calm settling over me. He was building a case, making sure that if I ever spoke out after his death, no one would believe me. Yes. And he was also setting the stage for your daughter's suspicions. She gestured to the box between us. Now, tell me what you've kept all these years. One by one, I removed the evidence of my silent suffering. Medical records documenting accidental injuries. The small notebook where I'd recorded incidents. In a code Gerald never deciphered. Photographs of bruises and cuts dated and hidden away. Bank statements showing how Gerald had gradually restricted my access to our finances. Why keep all this if you never intended to use it? I considered her question carefully. At first, it was self-preservation. I thought if things got bad enough, I might need proof. Later, it became a validation, I suppose. Evidence that I wasn't crazy, that what was happening was real. And you never showed any of this to Nola? I shook my head firmly. I wanted her to have a father she could love, even if it meant she couldn't fully love me. Detective Morales was silent for a long moment, her eyes on the photographic evidence of my decades of abuse. Finally, she looked up. Mrs. Wilson, your daughter is coming to the station at noon today. I'd like you to be there. Fear clutched at my throat. I don't think that's a good idea. It's time, Mrs. Wilson. The truth needs to come out, not just for your sake, but for hers. She gestured to the box. May I take these as evidence? I nodded, though parting with my secret archive felt like losing a limb. These hidden artifacts had been my only witnesses for so long. As Detective Morales carefully packed away the evidence of my silent suffering, she paused, looking up at me with genuine compassion. You protected your daughter for decades, Mrs. Wilson. But sometimes, the greatest act of love is allowing someone to face the truth, no matter how painful. After she left, I stood in the empty house, feeling strangely light despite the heaviness of what was to come. In a few hours, the carefully constructed world I'd built for Nola would crumble. The father she idolized would be revealed as the monster I'd hidden from her. The grandfather clock in the hallway, Gerald's pride and joy, ticked loudly in the silence. I walked over and stopped the pendulum mid-swing. It was time for some clocks to stop, for some truths to finally be heard. The police station was busier than I expected for a Tuesday afternoon. Officers moved purposefully through the hallways. Phones rang incessantly, and somewhere in the distance, a man was loudly protesting his innocence. Detective Morales met me at the front desk, her expression softening slightly when she saw me clutching my purse with white knuckles. Mrs. Wilson, she greeted me, her voice professional but kind. Thank you for coming. We're set up in interview room 3. She led me down a corridor, past rooms with glass windows where I could glimpse snippets of other people's crises. A young woman sobbing into her hands. An elderly man gesturing animatedly to an officer. Lives interrupted, stories unfolding. Just like mine. Your daughter is already here, Detective Morales said as we paused outside a door. She's been speaking with my partner, Detective Rivera. My heart hammered against my ribs. Does she know I'm coming? Not yet. We thought it would be better this way. Better. As if anything about this situation could be better. The room was small, with a table in the center and 4 chairs. A camera in the corner blinked its red eye, recording everything. Nola sat with her back to the door, her posture rigid, defensive. Even from behind, I could see how tightly wound she was, shoulders hunched, head slightly bowed. She'd always carried tension in the same places I did. Detective Rivera, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and silver at his temples, looked up as we entered. Nola turned, and the shock on her face quickly morphed into anger. "What is she doing?" "Here?" she demanded, half rising from her chair. "I'm not talking to her." "Ms. Wilson," Detective Rivera said calmly, "please sit down. Your mother is here at our request." "Then I'm leaving." Nola grabbed her purse, but Detective Morales moved to block the door. "Miss Wilson, you're not under arrest, but I strongly advise you to stay. We have new information about your father's death and about your parents' marriage that you need to hear." Nola's eyes darted between the detectives, then landed on me. The hatred there made my breath catch. "Whatever lies she's told you—" "Nola," I interrupted, my voice steadier than I felt. "Please, just listen." Something in my tone must have reached her because she slowly sank back into her chair, though her body remained coiled tight, ready to flee. I took the seat across from her, placing my purse on the table between us like a shield. Detective Morales sat beside me while Detective Rivera remained next to Nola. "Ms. Wilson," Detective Morales began, "we've been investigating your allegations against your mother thoroughly. In the process, we've uncovered evidence that paints a very different picture of your parents' relationship than the one you've described to us." Nola's jaw tightened. "What are you talking about?" Detective Rivera placed a folder on the table. "These are medical records documenting injuries your mother sustained throughout her marriage to your father. Broken ribs, a fractured wrist, severe bruising consistent with physical assault." He opened the folder, revealing photos I hadn't seen in years. Me with a black eye, trying to smile through the pain. Me with fingerprint bruises around my neck. Me with a split lip and a gash across my cheekbone that had required 7 stitches. Nola stared at the images, her face draining of color. This can't be right." "It is right, Nola," I said softly. "Your father was not the man you thought he was. No." She shook her head violently. "No, Dad would never. He loved us. He protected us." "He protected you," I corrected gently. "Because I made sure of it." Detective Morales pulled out another document. "We've also discovered financial records showing that your father systematically isolated your mother economically. He controlled all accounts, monitored her spending, and diverted substantial sums to private accounts she had no access to. And most importantly," Detective Rivera added, "we've found evidence that your father was deliberately creating a false narrative about your mother in the months before his death. He contacted old friends of hers, former colleagues, even distant relatives, trying to build a case that she was unstable or abusive." Nola's hands trembled as she pushed the photos away. "I don't believe this. My father was a good man." "To you," I said, the words catching in my throat. "He was a good father to you because I made sure of it. I took the rage, the control, the violence, so you would never have to." Nola looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you leave him?" "I tried, once. When you were 7, I explained, about our failed escape attempt, about Gerald's threats to take her away from me. I couldn't lose you, Nola, so I stayed. I endured. And I made sure you never saw the worst of him." Detective Morales placed another folder on the table. "Ms. Wilson, we've also examined the medication logs from your father's hospice care. There were no irregularities. Your mother administered his medication exactly as prescribed. The hospice nurses have confirmed this. And we've spoken with Dr. Patel, who treated your father in his final months," Detective Rivera added. "He's confirmed that your father's death was consistent with the natural progression of his disease. There is absolutely no evidence of foul play." Nola sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the photos before her. I could see her world crumbling, the perfect image of her father splintering under the weight of truth. "Then why did he write that note?" she whispered. "Why did he warn me about you?" Because he couldn't bear the thought of losing control, I answered. Even in death, he wanted to make sure I would suffer, that you would never trust me. Tears spilled down Nola's cheeks. All those times you had accidents, the time you fell down the stairs, when you burned your arm on the stove. None of them were accidents. And I blamed you, she whispered, horror dawning in her eyes. When Dad would get angry, I thought it was your fault. I thought you provoked him. That's what he wanted you to think. The silence that followed was heavy with decades of secrets and lies. Finally, Detective Morales spoke, her voice gentle but firm. Ms. Wilson, based on our investigation, we're dismissing your complaint against your mother. There is no evidence to support any wrongdoing on her part. In fact, the evidence strongly suggests that she was the victim of long-term domestic abuse. Nola nodded numbly, still staring at the photos. We'll give you two some privacy, Detective Rivera said, standing. Take as much time as you need. After. The detectives left. Nola and I sat in silence, the truth lying exposed between us like an open wound. Why didn't you hate me? She finally asked, her voice small. All these years I took his side. I believed him. I treated you like I deserved it, I finished for her. You were a child, Nola. You only knew what we showed you, what I allowed you to see. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. I accused you of murder. Yes, you did. How can you ever forgive me for that? I reached across the table and took her hand, half expecting her to pull away. She didn't. I don't know if forgiveness is what we need right now, I said truthfully. Maybe what we need is to start over, to get to know each other without your father standing between us. Nola's fingers tightened around mine. I don't know how to do that. Neither do I admitted. But I'd like to try. As we sat there, hands clasped across the table where accusations had flown just days before, I felt something shift between us. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Outside the interview room, life in the police station continued. Phones ringing, officers moving about, other people's crises unfolding. But inside our small space, time seemed suspended as mother and daughter faced each other across the wreckage of a shared past and the fragile possibility of a different future. The drive home from the police station was silent. Nola sat in the passenger seat of my old Buick, staring out the window as suburban landscapes drifted by. I kept my eyes on the road, afraid that if I looked at her, this fragile truce would shatter. I'd like to come in, she said when I pulled into my driveway. If that's okay. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We walked up the path to the front door together, separated by 2 feet of concrete and 38 years of misunderstandings. The house felt different with Nola in it, smaller. Somehow, as if it couldn't quite contain all our history, she paused in the entryway, her eyes tracking over familiar objects. The antique mirror Gerald had insisted on hanging despite its ornate ugliness, the formal family portraits where we all wore stiff smiles, the grandfather clock now silenced. You stopped it, she said, noticing the still pendulum of the clock. Yes. Dad loved that clock. I know. She moved into the living room, her steps hesitant. I used to think this was the perfect house, the perfect family. She turned to face me. How did I not see it? Because we didn't want you to, I answered simply. Both of us, in different ways. Your father wanted you to see his version of perfection. I wanted to protect you from seeing the cracks. Nola sank onto the couch, her body suddenly looking so young, so vulnerable. I need to know everything, Mom. Not just what the police showed me. I need to understand. I sat across from her in Gerald's old armchair, feeling the ghost of him all around us. Where should I start? The beginning. How did you meet him? Why did you marry him? I closed my eyes briefly, traveling back more than 4 decades. I was 22, working at the library downtown. Your father came in looking for a book on investment strategies. He was handsome, confident, 10 years, older than me. I was flattered when he asked me to dinner. The memories flowed easily now, after being locked away for so long. He was charming, attentive. He made me feel special. My parents loved him. So polished, so successful. When he proposed 6 months later, everyone said I was lucky. Nola leaned forward. When did it change? After the wedding. Little things. At first, criticizing my clothes, my friends, the way I spoke. Then controlling the money, insisting I account for every penny. The first time he hit me was 3 months after we married. I dropped a glass, and he slapped me so hard I fell. Nola winced, and I almost stopped, wanting to protect her even now. But she needed to hear this. We both needed me to say it. He was immediately sorry, crying, bringing flowers, promising it would never happen again. And I believed him. I laughed, bitterly. That's how it always starts. They're sorry until they're not, until they convince themselves you deserved it. But why stay? Even before I was born? I considered this carefully. Fear, at first. Shame. The belief that I could fix things. If I just tried harder. Then I got pregnant with you, and leaving became complicated. Did he hurt you when you were pregnant with me? The question hit like a physical blow. Yes, but differently. More. Controlled. He would grab my arm hard enough to leave marks, but not where anyone could see. Push me against walls. Nothing that might harm you. Nola's eyes filled with tears. And after I was born? After you were born, you became my reason for everything. For staying. For enduring. For keeping silent. I leaned forward, needing her to understand. You were the light in all that darkness, Nola. My beautiful, perfect daughter. She wiped at her eyes. But I turned against you. I believed him over you. Every time. Of course you did. He made sure of it. He was your hero, your protector. I was the one who said no, who enforced rules, who wasn't fun like Dad. The old pain surfaced, but I pushed it back down. It was a role I accepted because the alternative was worse. Nola stood abruptly and walked to the mantelpiece, studying the family photos arranged there. These are all lies, aren't they? These smiling family pictures. Not all lies. We had good moments, Nola. Your father could be charming when he wanted to be. Generous, even. There were vacations, birthdays, graduations where he was genuinely proud. But it wasn't real. Parts of it were real. My love for you, that was always real. She picked up a photo of the 3 of us at her high school graduation. I remember this day. Dad bought me that ridiculously expensive bracelet. You said it was too much, and I thought you were just being controlling about money. She set the photo down. But that wasn't it, was it? No. That was the day after he'd broken 2 of my ribs. I could barely stand for the ceremony, and he was out spending money we didn't have to make himself look like the generous father. Nola closed her eyes. The pain of these revelations etched across her face. I've been so blind. You saw what we showed you. She turned back to me. You said you tried to leave once when I was 7. What happened? I told her about the careful planning, the bus tickets, the small amount of cash I'd managed to hide away. The brief days of freedom at my sister's house before Gerald arrived with the police and his perfect act of the concerned husband. I remember that trip, Nola said slowly. You said we were going on an adventure. I was excited. Her brow furrowed. But I don't remember coming home. You were asleep in the car. When we got back, your father. I swallowed hard. Let's just say he made it very clear what would happen if I ever tried to leave again. Did he hurt you? Yes. But more importantly, he threatened to take you away from me permanently. Said he'd make sure I was declared an unfit mother, that I'd never see you again. The fear had been visceral, paralyzing. I believed him. He had the money, the connections, the reputation. Who would believe me over him? Nola returned to the couch, sitting closer to me this time. When he got sick. Was that when you finally felt free? The question hung between us, dangerous in its implications. Had I been relieved when my husband was dying? Had I welcomed his suffering? I felt many things when your father got sick, I said carefully. Relief wasn't one of them. Mostly I felt tired. So very tired. But you took care of him anyway. Yes. Even after everything he did to you. I met her eyes directly. I took vows, Nola. For better or worse, in sickness and in health. I kept mine, even when he broke his. She looked down at her hands. And now here we are. He's gone, and I accused you of killing him. Here we are, I agreed softly. I don't know how to fix this, Mom. I reached out and took her hand, feeling its warmth, its life. We start here, with truth, with trying to see each other clearly for the first time. As the afternoon light slanted through the windows, Nola and I sat together in a house that had witnessed so much pain, beginning the slow, painful process of excavating 3 decades of buried truths. The clock remained silent, but something else had begun ticking between us, the tentative rhythm of a relationship being rebuilt from its foundations. 6 months can change everything or nothing at all. In my case, it changed the rhythm of my days, the sounds in my house, the way light seemed to fall across familiar spaces. The day after our conversation, Nola had returned with a small suitcase. I'd like to stay for a while, she'd said, her voice hesitant but determined. If that's okay with you. I'd simply nodded and shown her to the guest room that had once been hers, now stripped of teenage posters and memorabilia, painted a neutral beige that Gerald had insisted on after she left for college. We can change the color, I'd offered, watching her take in the impersonal space. Make it yours again. She'd smiled, a small tentative curve of lips that reminded me of her childhood expressions. I'd like that. Those first weeks were awkward, both of us moving carefully around, each other and the ghost of Gerald that lingered in every corner. We developed routines, coffee together in the mornings before Nola left for her job at the architectural firm, quiet dinners in the evening where conversation gradually became less strained. We painted her room together, choosing a soft sage green that made the space feel alive again. I found myself sharing stories as we worked, not the painful ones, but memories I'd kept tucked away. Nola's first steps, the time she'd decided to give her teddy bears a bath in the toilet, her fierce determination to learn to ride a bike, without training wheels. I don't remember any of that, she'd said, brush pausing mid-stroke. You were very young, but I remember. I remember everything. Slowly, the house began to transform. Gerald's heavy, dark furniture was replaced piece by piece with items we chose together, lighter, warmer, more inviting. His study, which had been kept like a shrine, became a shared workspace where Nola could spread out her architectural drawings, and I could work on the memoir I'd finally found courage to begin. Today marks exactly 6 months since the day she threw those documents in my face and called me a leech. 6 months since the accusation that nearly destroyed us led instead to truth, and through truth to healing. I'm in the kitchen preparing lunch when I hear Nola's key in the front door. She's home early from work, which is unusual. Mom? She calls, her footsteps quick and light in the hallway. In here, I answer, wiping my hands on a dish towel. She appears in the doorway, slightly breathless, holding a large envelope. It came, she says, her eyes bright with anticipation. The final paperwork from the lawyer. My heart skips a beat. Have you opened it? She shakes her head. I wanted us to do it together. We moved to the dining table, a new one we'd found at an antique market, warm honey-colored wood that Gerald would have hated for being too rustic. Nola carefully opens the envelope and pulls out a stack of documents. It's done, she says after scanning the first page. The house is officially in both our names now. I exhale slowly, feeling a weight lift that I hadn't realized I was still carrying. After Gerald's death, we'd discovered that he'd left the house solely to Nola in his will. His final attempt to control me from beyond the grave. The legal battle to have my name added to the deed had been Nola's idea, her way of beginning to right decades of wrongs. There's something else, she says, pulling another document from the envelope. I had Mr. Simmons draw this up too. It's a power of attorney. I want you to have it, in case anything ever happens to me. I look at her, this daughter who once believed the worst of me, now trusting me with everything. Nola? You don't have to. I want to, she interrupts gently. It's important to me. As I take the document, our fingers brush, and I'm struck by how familiar her hands have become again. The slight crook of her left pinky from a childhood break. The artist's callus on her middle finger that never quite went away when she switched from drawing to computer design. Thank you, I say simply. She nods, then reaches back into the envelope. One more thing. What she pulls out makes my breath catch. A small silver locket on a delicate chain. It's identical to the one Gerald gave me on our 5th anniversary, the one he later ripped from my neck during one of his rages, claiming I didn't deserve such fine things. How did you? I found the jeweler's name in Dad's old records. It wasn't hard to commission a replica. She holds it out to me. Open it. With trembling fingers, I pry open the small silver heart. Inside is a miniature photo, not of Gerald as the original had held, but of Nola as a child, her smile wide and uninhibited, and beside it, a tiny inscription. Truth heals. Oh, Nola, I whisper, tears blurring my vision. I know it doesn't fix anything, she says, her own eyes glistening. Nothing can erase what happened, but I want you to have something beautiful to replace what he took from you. I let her fasten the locket around my neck, feeling its slight weight against my collarbone. Not a burden, but a promise. I've been thinking, she says as we clear away. The papers. About the inheritance money. The money. The final piece of Gerald's manipulations. He'd left everything to Nola, with the specific instruction that none of it was to be used for my benefit. Another way to ensure I would struggle without him. Another attempt to drive a wedge between mother and daughter. What about it? I ask, carefully. I want to use some of it to start a foundation for women and children affected by domestic violence. Somewhere they can get legal help, housing assistance, counseling, all the things you didn't have. The simple beauty of her plan leaves me momentarily speechless. My daughter, turning her father's final act of control into something healing, something powerful. We could call it the Silent Voices Foundation, she continues, for all the women who've had to keep quiet to survive. I think that's perfect, I manage finally. Later that evening, we sit together on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The garden is coming alive under our care, flowers Gerald never allowed because they were too messy now bloom in riotous color along the fence. I found some of your old letters today, Nola says, breaking our comfortable silence. In the attic. Letters you wrote to me but never sent. My heart stutters. I'd forgotten about those. You wrote them when I was in college, when I was barely speaking to you. I nod, remembering those lonely years when Nola, fully under her father's influence, had reduced our relationship to occasional terse phone calls and obligatory holiday visits. You never told me how much I was hurting you, she says softly. Not once in all those letters did you blame me or make me feel guilty. You just loved me. You were my daughter. Loving you was never the hard part. She reaches over and takes my hand, her grip firm and sure. I want you to know that I see you now, Mom. Really see you. Not as the woman Dad wanted me to see. Not as the villain in his story. Just you, the mother who protected me even when it cost her everything. The setting sun catches the silver locket at my throat, making it gleam like a small star. For decades I lived in silence, bearing wounds no one could see, fighting battles no one knew were happening. I protected my daughter at the cost of her love, her trust, her understanding. But here, in the gentle evening light, with my daughter's hand in mine and truth finally spoken between us, I realize that some silences can be broken. Some wounds can heal. Some battles, even those fought in the dark for too long, can finally be won. I see you too, I tell her, squeezing her hand. My brave, beautiful daughter. I always have. Around us, the garden blooms in defiance of all the years it was suppressed. Inside the house that was once a prison and is now becoming a home, no clocks tick out the rhythm of fear and control. The silence between us is no longer filled with secrets, but with understanding, with forgiveness, with the quiet miracle of beginning again. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.